Okay, good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to this session for new staff, Zoom for new staff. And my colleague Sarah Pattison is going to deliver it today. I might run through the running order there, Sarah. So what we're going to cover this morning is a small bit of a technical challenge. I'll just point that out. We're sharing Zoom within Zoom, but bear with us. So setting up Zoom in Canvas. So as you'll all possibly know, Zoom is tightly integrated with Canvas or VLE. And that integration is done via what's called an LTI. So it's very tightly integrated in that when you schedule classes through Zoom or through Canvas, they show up in the calendar, students get notifications and so on, and also recordings are automatically posted into the module afterwards if you do record them. So Sarah's going to run through that in a sec. We're also going to run through just testing your microphone and audio settings. So your microphone and speaker settings, that will vary depending on whether you have a headset or whether you're using the inbuilt mic on your laptop, but the same principles will apply. Allowing participants entry. So that's quite an important one. If you're allowing students entry into a class, or if it's guest speakers or participants, there's a few things to look out for there. The chat is primarily the place that you're going to have your participants communicating with you, unless then you open up the microphone for maybe more discursive sessions. Sharing your screen is obviously one of the most important things you might do in a Zoom class. So we'll talk about the various options there, including sharing your desktop, sharing your window, sharing a particular application, and just a few of the other settings there. We're also going to talk about recording. So that's recording your session in Zoom if you so wish, and also then how to access that recording in Canvas or to edit it as well if you need to. So the one thing to point out as well, folks, if you have any questions through the session, I would be obliged if you would please use the Q&A feature. It's on the bottom of your screen in Zoom. So if you go to the Q&A, you can type in questions, or for anyone that's watching us live on YouTube, you can actually use the comments feature in there, and our colleagues are monitoring that there. We'll open it up for questions at the end as well. We can discuss anything that you might have a question about as new staff, or even existing staff if you're just looking for a refresher on the setup of Zoom and so on. And also just to point out as well, if you want to review the recording, it's available on demand on YouTube very shortly after this event. So look, I'll shut up there and I'll let Sarah, if you're there, Sarah, just to take over. And thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah. So I'm going to start by going into Canvas. So you'll see my face in a minute when I open up the Zoom. But first, I'll show you how Zoom works from within Canvas. So both you and your students will access Zoom classes from Canvas itself, from within your module. And what you'll be doing is scheduling meetings from within Zoom. And that's also where cloud recordings will go. And I'll talk a little bit more about recordings later. But as you can see here, we have an upcoming meeting. That's the one I'm going to demo in a few minutes. But first, I'll just show you how you set up a meeting. So you'd click schedule a new meeting from the Zoom tab. And then depending on what date it's on, how long the meeting is, and if it's recurring. So if you have, 12 classes in a semester, you can do recurring and have it happen every week at the same time, that kind of thing. You can also set it up so that either only MTU Cork students can access, or all authenticated users. So you have to have a Zoom account to join the Zoom meetings for MTU. But if you had like an external speaker or something, you could use this security measure, this option, to allow them in as well. You can also, in the meeting options, you can record the meeting automatically, and this could be useful if you tend to forget to click record, but it will record the whole meeting. You can also click record when you're in the meeting, and breakout room pre-assign as well. I won't go into detail on this, but we have a lot of information on this on our help site, and you can probably find it on YouTube as well. But basically, you can automatically add students into breakout rooms before the class. You can also do that from within the class. as well. So what I'm going to do now is go into a meeting that I've already set up. So if I just click start, this is what you'll be doing, what your students will be doing, and then open the meeting, and it'll open in Zoom. Here we are. So the first thing you do when you open your Zoom meeting ahead of your class is to check your audio settings, basically. So you just press this little up button here. You can make sure you're using the right microphone. So the microphone I'm using within this Zoom session is just the webcam microphone. And then I have a speaker, that's just the speaker of my laptop. I want to test out to make sure everything's working. Now you won't be able to hear this here because I'm sharing within, I haven't shared the sound of this, but you'll be able to hear if you test the speaker, you can test everything, test the mic, and make sure everything's working. You can see the levels changing there, so that means that everything's working okay. Then what I can do is show you as well. We have Ruth here, who is trying to come into the class. So all your students will see a message when they sign into the class, basically a waiting room message. And when you're ready to start the class, like after you've tested your microphone and also I put on my video, then you can admit your students. So that's what I'll do now, is admit Ruth to the meeting. You can see then that's Ruth joined the meeting. Thanks, Ruth. So now what I can do is show you the different settings, and we might get Ruth to help with some of this. But so the security settings, so you can allow different participants to, so at the moment they can't share their screen, so students can't just share screens, but you could allow them to. Everyone's allowed to chat, unmute themselves, start video, share whiteboards, and you can also remove participants or suspend activities if you want to. Here, as I showed before, you can click participants and see everyone that's in the meeting. I can also ask to unmute a student and they'll unmute, or then I can mute them again myself. We won't go into detail in this session on polls, but you can create a poll or a quiz for within your class. And I'll skip on to the reactions. What you might want to do at the start of your class is make sure everyone can hear you. So you could say, if you can hear me, can you press the yes button? So if I ask Ruth now to click the yes button, if she can hear me, or she's just on a thumbs up, that's great. So they're really useful to use within your class, all these buttons. And if they want to ask a question, they could click the raise hand button. You see, I have to click that, and you can lower your hand and all that kind of stuff. It's really helpful. So then I'm going to move on and use the chat. So here you can see you can chat to your students. So I can say hello, and they can write in the chat too. And you can also write to students directly. So I could say, hi Ruth, and it'll only go to her and not to the rest of the students. So that's helpful if you want to write to people directly, or they can do amongst themselves as well. I'm going to move on now to sharing your screen. So there's a few options you have here for sharing your screen. So if you wanted to share a particular window that you have open, so you can see here I have Google Chrome open, I could just share that window. I can also share a whiteboard, or even if you had your phone, you could share that. And we won't go into the advanced options today, but we'll talk about those on a future session next week on Zoom features. But if you're sharing your screen and you're sharing like a YouTube video or something, you'll want your students to actually be able to hear the sound that your computer is making. So you have to make sure that you also click share sound when you're sharing your screen. So if I just click share, now what I do here and I show this, Ruth will be seeing what's on my screen here. And I can just say, can you see that, Ruth? And get her to either write in the chat or do a thumbs up. See, she has a thumbs up there, so it's really good. And then I could stop sharing as well. And then for recording, so I didn't set up this meeting to record at all. So I can show you how to do it instead. If you, at the beginning of the class, click record, then it's recording to the cloud basically, and you can pause recording at any time and play again. And it's pretty easy to see if the session is being recorded or not. And you could get your students to remind you as well, or you could just use, as I said before, the record automatically from Canvas. If I click stop recording, then it says, are you sure you want to stop recording? Click yes, And then this is going to go onto the cloud and it'll go into Canvas. So what I'm going to do now is go back to Canvas and actually show you that. So 1 second there. And it takes a few minutes for these recordings to process and go onto Canvas, but I did do one earlier. And since that recording was so short, that one's also up there. But this recording, and you can just press play and it'll open the recording and your students can watch back recordings. So you don't have to worry about that. It's all available there. And that's really the main features of Zoom. If anyone has any questions, we might take them now.
I might just come in there, Sarah, just maybe to highlight a few of the things there, and we might kind of go back and forth. I don't see any questions in there yet, but please feel free to come in, folks. So maybe alternative hosts, Sarah, is something to mention. So if we go back to Canvas, in the Canvas settings for your Zoom session, when you're setting it up, you have the ability. It depends. So if by default, what happens is if you have teachers, if you have lecturers who are co-lecturing on a module, they'll actually be put in here as alternative hosts, which means that they can start up the session with you or in your absence. So that's useful if you were, if you're away 1 week and you wanted someone to kind of pitch in for you, or indeed if you just if you share a module and you do a kind of a week on, week off type thing. Just in terms of the recording meeting automatically in cloud. So that tends not to be used, I suppose, if you want to have the kind of the comfort to basically kind of, chit chat before a session, set yourself up. So usually, I guess it's probably safer to hit record when you're in your session. But if you're super comfortable with the way you run Zoom, eventually what you might do is you might set a class or a meeting to automatically record, and that'll basically start recording straight away when you launch the session. I personally wouldn't really use the automatically record in cloud, just to have that bit of a comfort at the start of a session, to get myself ready, to compose myself, to get my notes ready and so on. And that's maybe an important thing there. Just on the other settings there, if you scroll up a bit, so we have authentication settings. They're worth mentioning. So in the security settings there, I know Sarah mentioned it, but you have 2 settings there, and it's important to note that the default setting is that it is only MTU Cork staff and students will be able to view or access your session. With that, you're just basically anyone authenticating using your CIT credentials. Currently, it's CIT credentials, not MTU credentials. There's part of a larger kind of an MTU-wide project there around identity management. But the other one there, then the other authentication setting, allows you to basically set up so that all authenticated users can access the Zoom session. So that's people that are maybe outside of the organization and might want to access a class. So examples might be, for example, an external speaker, a guest speaker, or maybe someone from an organization that you would like to come in and just talk to your students. Those people could then participate within, breakouts and things like that as well. Just on the cloud recordings, then I suppose they're all automatically recorded to the cloud. So there isn't any limit in terms of the length of your recordings or anything. I wouldn't be worrying about that. What you can do is you can go in and edit your recordings though. Maybe Sarah, that's something worth looking at if you're able to. Could you go into your, just to show the kind of the other Zoom dashboard side of things, maybe while I'm talking. So I suppose one other area within Zoom that you can view your recordings and other things is actually through this dashboard. So this isn't within Canvas, this is actually from within the Zoom dashboard. So it's accessible via telcit.zoom.us. And some useful things worth noting here in terms of recording. So you can clip them if you wish. So that's something you can do, but you can only really clip it from one end to the other. all recordings actually have automatic transcripts on them. So basically that means that there's AI that basically translates what you're saying, transcribes it live, and that also is really useful from a point of view of a student maybe trying to glance through or review or revise a lecture and be able to kind of go through it in time. I think also there are smart highlights that are added to a recording. You can also manually add highlights. So highlights might be something you want the students to review afterwards, and you just want them to kind of scrub to that point in the timeline. But there's also smart highlights. I think smart highlights actually add into it after the fact. So if you started sharing something and you stopped sharing something, if you switched from one mode to the other, like a breakout and so on, those things actually get automatically time-stamped on the timeline. And that's kind of quite a neat feature, I think, from the point of view of being able to make your recordings more accessible, really. I don't know, do we have any questions of note from anywhere, folks? Is there anything, Dara or Lauren, that's coming in? Or should we? Yeah.
There was a question into the Q&A, Shane, from Bernie, who asked if there are different types of meetings that one could set up, for example, like webinars. And I just mentioned that webinar licenses are not available for staff, but MTU staff, their regular Zoom sessions can include up to 300 participants. So I'm not sure if there's anything else you want yourself or Sarah wanted to add to that.
That's a good point, actually. So there's nothing really you're losing by having a meeting, because meetings can actually have registration features as well. So the reason why we use a webinar is that we actually we stream out to YouTube, and we also potentially reach people that don't have Zoom, authenticated CIT Zoom accounts yet, especially new staff starting off. So, just from the point of view of registrations, I think Sarah is showing it up there. You can actually click the registration feature, and that will actually create a facility where people can register. So you're getting the same functionality really as a webinar there. You can enter your name, and that's useful to see how many people might register for your event and how many people are attending. So that's a good question there, Bernie. Do we have any others, or is there anything else we might want to cover there, folks? I wonder. Dara, is there anything we're missing out on, or should we actually go back into the meeting client, I wonder?
Just one thing, if you do have an external lecturer, and they won't be able to access Canvas, so what you would do is you'd copy this meeting invitation from within the Zoom meeting. And
that's a very good point there, Sarah. So the Zoom URL, when you set up authentication, external authentication, is what you'd send directly to that guest speaker. Obviously, we don't have guest access into Canvas because it's only registered staff and students can access that environment for obvious reasons, for security reasons and privacy and so on. Maybe if we go back into the Zoom client a second, Sarah, there might be a couple of things we might look at. So I suppose from the point of view of what students will typically see, we didn't see it really there, but when a student tries to access a Zoom session from Canvas, they'll actually be put into a waiting room by default, and that's another security measure. That message you'll see actually if you're a guest on another Zoom session, and that just basically tells them they can't record any on-screen content, and there's a kind of a mention of data privacy and security in there, I think. Once you're ready, so that's a good thing to note, I suppose, as a lecturer. When you start a session, you don't get all your students flooding into the room like you would a physical classroom. So they're not all coming in the door and kind of shuffling around. You have that kind of ability to park them in a waiting room. You can communicate out to them in that waiting room as well if you want to. So there's an ability to do that where you just message them and say, I'm setting up, I'm running 2 minutes late or something like that. And the other thing as well to mention is if you're using Zoom and Canvas, for example, if you were late for a session, you might blast out a Canvas announcement to your students and say, look, the session is running 5 minutes late, I'm not getting to the office because I'm caught in traffic or in the rain or something like that. But the waiting room is a really nice feature to be able to just compose yourself, get your notes up, get your screen share up, and make sure that your technology is working, like your audio tests and your video tests. So Sarah went through the tests there as well. So if you go into your audio settings, it might be worth noting, if you go in there, Sarah, that in the audio settings, you have test speaker, test mic. It's worth keeping an eye on this and maybe doing it at least if you're connecting up a new device, especially a headset, because sometimes the automatically adjusting the volume might either be too low or too high. So this is where you'd actually manually tweak that. If you have background noise, so if you have kind of faint noise, computer fan noise, if you have, if you're in a shared office and you have people typing or talking or barking, as is the case here, dogs barking, you can actually use a kind of a suppression feature here to kind of cancel out that noise in the background. So that's a nice feature. Just kind of test that out and see how you get on. There's a setting here for anyone that's into, that's an audiophile, really looking at music and professional audio. If you're using high quality microphones, so desktop microphones, desktop dynamic microphones, and so on, you can actually enable a feature for high fidelity sound if you want to hear original sound, and that allows you to kind of just make the most out of that audio device, but that'll vary depending on person to person. If you go to your video settings, Sarah, there you can tweak the settings for your webcam. So if you have a HD webcam and you have the bandwidth, it's worth clicking the HD button there, so that'll give you the full HD, and you can see the difference even in Sarah's image there from HD to SD, even in the amount of the screen being covered. You can mirror your video, you can touch up your appearance. So touching up the appearance kind of softens the skin tones a bit, and you can kind of accentuate that if you want to. So if you woke up on a bad morning and you had heavy bags under your eyes, you could maybe, you could lessen that to some degree on the screen using the touch-up appearance. The useful thing here with adjusting low light is if you are in a kind of a dark room and you want to kind of just correct for that, you can use the adjust for low light feature. And most of the other stuff is kind of standard enough there, I think. Backgrounds actually might be worth mentioning as well there, Sarah. So you can blur your background. I think that's probably the most common feature. You can also upload your own background, so you can typically add the MTU background, for example, if you want to, and others which are available on the marketing site. If you go to marketing.mtu.ie, I think it is. Going back then to the security settings, maybe if we come out of here, Sarah, and down to security. So I suppose by default, these meetings and permissions are set up in such a way that it suits a classroom environment. So by default, students are muted coming into a session. They can unmute themselves. There's nothing locking them from doing it, but by default, they're unmuted. So there's a bit of a kind of a thing, especially with new students, to kind of get them used to a bit of netiquette when it comes to using Zoom. That would be just tell them, don't come in on your microphone without maybe prompting through chat or something that you have a question. Chat really is the place where a lot of the back and forth might happen, where a student might ask questions and so on. You could imagine it getting quite unwieldy if you have everyone coming in on their mic at the same time, unless that's the intention, and you might have some kind of a session that you might want to have a kind of quite a back and forth and a sharing between students. Videos are great if you can ask your students to use their webcam, because that can get, make sure it's quite engaging. I won't give out to you, Ruth, for not having your webcam on there, but students will vary depending on there she is. So it's nice to have students use their webcam if they so wish, particularly if you're using breakout sessions and things like that. The whiteboards feature is useful. We're going to talk about that in our session next week on new Zoom features. Now, in a case that you ever were in a situation where you wanted to remove a participant, and hopefully there won't be ever a case of this, but if you did have a student that wasn't acting in a good way in a session, you could remove them from the session. No, we won't remove Ruth. I think she's been a good student so far. What you can do also is you can suspend participant activities. So in a case where you just wanted to make sure that everyone was muted, all chat was muted, all video was suspended, you could just turn everything off. And it will just lock the meeting as well. So I don't think, to be honest, there's going to be situations where you're going to be doing that, but it is useful to know where those features are. Participants panel, you can just view all the participants. So obviously Ruth is the only student in here at the moment, but when you do see all of the students, it's useful. And all of that information, by the way, as well, is available in a report in Canvas. We can look at that in a second. Polls are useful. We'll be talking about those in another session. They're really useful just for building in polls into your class. A really good idea where you kind of break up the class rather than it being you know, talking to the class all the time and you kind of wearing yourself down. If you use the chat is covered there by Sarah. You have, you know, reactions, emojis and stuff like that, and you can PM students or they can PM you. The share options, you know, I suppose probably worth mentioning desktop versus application sharing. Sarah, I know you covered it a while ago, just to reiterate. So you have a screen sharing option. So screen is your desktop, your whole screen. But if you had multiple screens, you actually see two screens to share. And also then you have the ability to share windows or applications. So that's an application. And then you also have the ability to share, you know, particular windows within an application. Now we haven't it here because we don't have multiple windows in that application, but you can do that. Optimizing video clip is for when you're sharing YouTube videos. That's probably worth mentioning there, Sarah. So if you go to new share, if you're ever sharing something from YouTube, optimizing for video clip is useful because that just makes sure it's set up for that. I do have something coming up there. Panelist Lauren, do you want to call that out, or is there anything in there?
Sorry, Shane, I think that was actually me. It's just to mention Bernie had a good question, which is if you need to play a video, if it is part of your PowerPoint presentation or if it's separate, are there extra settings that need to be checked? So just with the share screen, it is the share sound option, maybe just to mention that.
Very good. Yeah. So that's probably the most important thing there if you're sharing media. Now you can also do some more advanced stuff. So if you go into the advanced tab, I know we said we wouldn't cover this, but there are a few options here. So you can actually share video. That might be a really useful one if you have video to share. So if you click on that there, Sarah, what you get is you'll be prompted when you go, so you'll be uploading a video. So that's probably the most surefire way to make sure that your students are getting a really good video experience. If you have the ability to share the video, if you have the download, you can actually upload that into Zoom and play it. But look, it's fine as well if you want to stream YouTube or Vimeo or other videos, so long as you kind of just use the share sound and obviously optimize the video clip as well. There are other options there. You can share PowerPoint slides as a virtual background. You can share portions of screens and things like that. We'll probably leave that because they're kind of up to the features in the next session, but it's just good to know, like, there's a lot of share options there, including if you did want to if you go to the basic one there, Sarah, to share content from your iPhone or your iPad. So you could actually AirPlay into Zoom, and if you're in a classroom situation or if you want to just be walking around the place, you could actually use that and share or annotate. So really useful for the whiteboards feature, for example. So that's a cool feature as well. If we go down, Sarah, out of that and just look at some of the other options on the toolbar, you have record, which we covered. Reactions is covered. Whiteboards we cover in another session because that deserves a whole section in itself. And then the last one I think is also something we'll cover in the new features. It's start focus mode, which is great for particular activities where you just want to focus things and just cut out a lot of the noise in Zoom. Breakout rooms are great for group sessions and breaking students out into their different groups. And live transcript allows you to enable live transcript and to tweak that there. If we go back maybe just as a final thing, Sarah, to the Canvas side of things. So if we end our session, sorry, Sarah, if we go back to our Zoom session, what we typically do is we'll end that session. So we'll end for all, and that'll actually close down the session. And then you get a message saying a cloud recording is available. Now, the cloud recording won't typically be available until, a period of time after the session. And that really depends on how long your session is. So if you have a class that's an hour long, it will take us slightly longer to render out. But if you go to your cloud recordings, it'll be available in there. If you click into that, like Sarah's doing there, you can view the recording. Now, what you do get is you actually get a report. We're not getting it here yet, but you'll get an actual attendance report for your recording as well within Canvas, and that's quite useful. I think that's it, really. I'm not sure if there's any questions coming in. Well, maybe one thing, actually, I did see a question coming in about someone not being able to log in to view meetings. So it's really important, everybody, that unfortunately what we're using right now is we're not using MTU credentials, because we're not there as a university yet in terms of having that identity management bit sorted yet in terms of IT across Kerry and Cork. So at the moment, we're still using our CIT credentials, and it's really important that if you're logging into Canvas or Zoom, that you use your CIT credentials. So once you log into Canvas, it'll also authenticate you into Zoom. So you actually don't have to worry about logging into Zoom. It'll actually pass over your identity into Zoom, auto authenticate you. It'll recognize that you're a staff member and give you all the permissions. Actually, on the other side of that, if you're a student, it'll do a very similar thing, but it'll actually authenticate the student, and it'll give them a very different set of permissions for Zoom. So obviously it won't allow them to record, it won't allow them to do certain things that you as a lecturer will be able to do when you're running a class. So if for anyone that has any questions about Zoom, there's a load of stuff on our site. If you go to tel.cit.ie, and if you go to the support section, we have stuff for staff, stuff for students, but there's self-guided support, which Sarah is going through there. If you search the search bar, there's kind of a smart search for anything to do with TEL, really, at MTU Cork here. So you'll be able to search for, whatever, Zoom, Canvas, etc. And there's a smart search facility there with smart results. Breakout rooms, everything from breakout rooms to authentication to sharing to whiteboarding, and all of those different things you might be wondering about, even just logging in to Canvas and Zoom, all of those things are covered in those guides. So I would maybe encourage you to have a look at those guides in the first instance. The other thing you can do, of course, is you can contact us. So if you go to edtech at mtu.ie, that'll actually log a ticket with us, and we can interact with you that way. Also, I suppose it's worth noting from a Canvas point of view that if you go into Canvas, thanks, Sarah. If you go into Canvas, there's a help menu down the left-hand side, and that's really good from the point of view of accessing help for mainly Canvas, but there is Zoom stuff in there as well that directs you to the Zoom guides. But if you want any Canvas specific support, go into your into the web chat. There is the first thing we'd recommend, and also into using the phone option is really good. Can you drop the URL for the help section in the chat, please? No problem, Lauren, you might do that there, please. So the URL for our help section on the site into the chat. Great. And then I'm not sure if there's anything else worth mentioning, Sarah. We've covered launching your Zoom session. Maybe go back to the first slide and we just make sure that we have everything covered.
We have a YouTube page as well that has a lot of content on it.
Yeah, very good. So if you go to our YouTube channel, there's basically a kind of a back catalog there of all of our recordings. So you'll see the one live there happening right now. but we also have a lot of stuff there from the last year, and a lot of that stuff is still really relevant. So getting started with Zoom, assessment, etc. So there's a lot of stuff there that's on back catalog, and you can actually scrub through to the stuff that's relevant for you as well at any one time. Today won't be the end, obviously, of any of the training that we're doing. We have a program. Maybe Sarah, you might bring it up there. So we have this week is kind of finished, I think, but we have a selection of sessions again after today. Sorry. So we've one session today. It's a hybrid session happening in the seminar room and online. So if you want to come in to see us and talk to us, that's actually online and in the seminar room. That's going to be a Canvas and Zoom refresher at 2:00, and there's a program of events for next week as well then. So if you go to that training page, there's a mixture of Zoom, Canvas stuff there for both staff that are new and existing staff in there as well. So have we any other questions? Happy to answer any more if you have any, to throw in the Q&A or onto our YouTube comments. Okay, nothing so far. Hopefully everybody has got something from that. And I just want to say thanks so much to Sarah for delivering the bulk of that session in Zoom. We'll be doing something very similar on new features, which there's some exciting stuff in there as well. And thanks to the whole team there for supporting the other channels as well online. Don't forget, you can view the recording as well if you want to catch up on anything. There over the last 37 minutes or so. You can actually view it all on demand afterwards. So thanks very much, everybody. Have a good day, and we'll talk to you all soon.